Technology was crude. It would remain crude. We forgot, or perhaps we never understood, that violence and intelligence are not opposites. That fighting and cooperation can exist in the same being. That a species capable of terrible destruction is also capable of breathtaking creation. Vex found his voice. But the records, there's nothing in any archive about a war with humanity.
They fight themselves.
If such a conflict occurred, where is the evidence?
They don't.
The evidence, the archivist said softly, is that we are no longer an empire. The evidence is that I am the last of my kind, carrying memories that no one else shares. Speaking to beings who think my people are a myth, we erased ourselves from history because we could not bear to be remembered. He spread his arms, indicating the chamber, the Confederation, everything. After we lost, and make no mistake, we lost completely. We had a choice. We could let the galaxy know what had happened. We could let every species see that a race of primitives had dismantled the greatest empire in history. Or we could vanish and let our legend fade, and hope that the lesson died with us. We chose to hide, Traxon said. And for once his flat voice held something like contempt. No. The archivist met the Cathar's compound eyes without flinching. We chose to warn you. By removing ourselves, we left a gap of mystery. We hoped that someday, when another species rose that reminded you of them, you would remember that an empire fell, and no one knows why. You would ask questions. You would be cautious. He gestured at the holographic display at the blue planet turning slowly in its sea of stars. But you didn't ask. You never ask. You looked at that world and saw primitives. You looked at their wars and saw weakness. You looked at their chaos and saw disorder. You didn't see what we saw, too late? And what was that? Vex whispered. Potential, as the archivist's voice cracked. Boundless, terrifying, uncontrollable potential. They don't think like we do. They don't evolve like we do. They don't progress along predictable paths. One generation, they're throwing rocks at each other. The next, they're splitting atoms. One century, they're burning witches. The next, they're walking on their moon. They leap, they stumble, they fall. And then they get up and leap again. Always forward, always hungry, always questioning. He turned back to Earth and his shoulders sagged. I watched my empire die because we could not comprehend that. We had become too perfect, too stable, too certain. We had eliminated war, eliminated conflict, eliminated the very pressures that drive evolution. We thought we had achieved paradise. And then these children came, still bloody from their own birth pangs, still screaming with the pain of becoming, and they showed us what we had lost. What did you lose? Vex asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The capacity to change, the archivist said. The willingness to risk everything for something new. The understanding that survival isn't about being the strongest or the smartest, it's about being the most adaptable. Humans adapt. It's their only constant. Put them in fire, and they learn to shape it. Put them in water, and they learn to breathe it. Put them in the void of space, and they learn to sing in it. He laughed again, that same broken sound. We couldn't adapt. We were too rigid, too proud, too convinced of our own superiority. So when they came not as conquerors, but as refugees, as explorers, as exiles, we tried to contain them, to control them, to make them fit our perfect juice. His voice dropped to a whisper, and they broke us. Not with weapons, though they had those invented in desperation, forged in the fires of their own endless conflicts. They broke us with ideas, with questions we couldn't answer, with possibilities we had never imagined. They offered us a choice, change or die. And we chose to die rather than become like them. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient hum of the chamber seemed to have stopped, as if the very building held its breath. Finally, Battlemaster Traxon spoke. This is a compelling narrative, Archivist. But narratives are not data. You offer no proof, no records, no evidence that any of this occurred. You ask us to abandon strategic logic based on the ramblings of an extinct species' last survivor. I ask you to listen, the archivist said quietly. I ask you to look at those humans, really look at them. Men, see what I saw? See the child who paints on cave walls, and the engineer who builds cities in the sky, and the soldier who dies for strangers, and the poet who weeps for enemies. See the contradiction? See the chaos? See the beauty? He turned to face the assembly one last time. Your scans show them as primitive. Your logic predicts their development. Your strategies account for their weapons. But none of that matters, because you are measuring them against yourselves. You are assuming they will respond as you would respond, think as you would think, fight as you would fight. His ancient eyes found Vex's, and the High Admiral felt something cold slide down his spine. They won't. They never do. And by the time you realize that, it will be too late. Not because they will destroy you, though they could, but because you will have already destroyed yourselves trying to understand them. He shuffled back toward the shadows, his tattered robes whispering against the floor. I have given my warning. I have done what I could. What happens next is between you and the storm. The chamber remained silent long after he disappeared into the darkness. Vex looked at Traxon. Traxon looked at Vex, and then, slowly, inevitably, they looked at the holographic display at the blue planet, the swirling clouds, the tiny ships crawling between worlds. Is the archivist is senile, Vex said, and his voice sounded hollow even to himself. His species has been extinct for 2 million cycles. He doesn't know what he's talking about, agreed Traxon replied. Though his mandibles clicked in a pattern that suggested uncertainty, a pattern Vex had never seen him use before. The data is clear. Humanity poses no immediate threat. Preemptive neutralization remains the most logical course. Then we vote again. The lights rippled through the galleries. Green for yes. Amber for abstain. No reds, but Vex noticed with an unease he couldn't quite shake that the vote was not unanimous. A few representatives, a handful of species from the galactic fringe, the ones who had always been a little different, a little unpredictable, had chosen to abstain, and in the shadows at the chamber's lowest level, a pair of ancient eyes watched the green lights bloom and wept. For the archivist had seen this before. He had watched his own people vote the same way 2 million years ago. He had watched them send their fleets, confident in their superiority, certain of their logic, and he had watched them fall. But the galaxy, as always, ignored the warning. They called it HFY Humanity First yesterday. A joke, a punchline, a relic of a dead species' delusions. Battlemaster Traxon of the Cathar. Collective stood at the observation port of his flagship, the Indomitable Reason, and watched the Sol system unfold before him like a specimen pinned for study. 40-7 vessels comprised the pacification fleet, a modest showing by Confederation standards, but more than sufficient for the task at hand. 3 Avi battlecruisers, their wings gleaming like burnished gold. 12 Cathar assault ships, faceted obsidian crystals that absorbed light rather than reflected it, and 32 support vessels from lesser species, each fulfilling their assigned role in the great machine of galactic Drisu. They had emerged from warp space at the precise, calculated distance half a light year from the system's edge, far enough to avoid triggering any primitive detection systems, close enough to begin their slow, dignified approach. At sublight speeds, it would take them 3 weeks to reach Earth's orbit, 3 weeks for the humans to notice them, to panic, to prepare, 3 weeks for fear to do its work. The Avi Admiral is requesting a strategic conference. Click to subordinate, its mandibles forming the subsonic patterns that served as Cathar communication. She wishes to discuss cultural considerations. Traxon did not turn from the observation port. Define cultural considerations. She believes we should wait, observe, allow the humans to make first contact on their own terms. Now Traxon did turn, his compound eyes fixing on the subordinate with an intensity that made the lesser being's antennae twitch. That is illogical. First contact protocols are clearly established. We announce ourselves, state our demands, and await compliance. Deviation from protocol introduces variables that cannot be predicted. I conveyed this. The Avi Admiral suggested that deviation might be prudent, given the archivist's testimony. For a long moment, Traxon was silent. The archivist? That name had haunted the 3-week journey from Exia Prime. Whispered in corridors, debated in strategy rooms, ultimately dismissed as irrelevant. Traxon himself had filed a formal report categorizing the ancient being's words as unsubstantiated narrative with zero evidentiary support. The Cathar Collective operated on data, not stories, on logic, not fear, and yet Traxon had found himself in the quiet hours between shifts, running simulations. Hypothetical scenarios in which a primitive species somehow defeated a superior force. The simulations always failed. The math was clear. Technology, organization, resources, the Confederation possessed overwhelming advantages in every measurable category. Victory was not merely probable. It was mathematically certain. So why did he keep running the simulations? The archivist's testimony is irrelevant, he said finally, his voice flat. We proceed according to protocol. Inform Admiral Vex that cultural observations will be conducted after compliance is secured, not before. The subordinate clicked acknowledgement and retreated. Traxon turned back to the observation port. The sun of this Systema mediocre yellow dwarf, unremarkable in every way, burned at the center of his view. Its light taking 8 minutes to reach the tiny blue planet that orbited at the perfect distance for liquid water. A Goldilocks world, some species called it, rare, precious, and currently inhabited by beings who had no idea they were about to lose it. He activated the long-range sensors, and data flooded his neural interface. Population, approximately 8 billion, distributed across 7 continents and numerous island chains. Political organization, fractured into approximately 195 sovereign entities. Many engaged in active or cold conflicts with their neighbors. Technological level, primitive by galactic standards, but showing signs of rapid acceleration. They had achieved orbit, established a permanent presence on their single moon, and were currently constructing what appeared to be a modular space station in low planetary orbit. They called it something in their dominant language. The translator rendered it as Harmony Portal or Heavenly Palace. Depending on dialect, Traxon processed this information and filed it away. None of it mattered. In 3 weeks, these humans would learn that their petty divisions, their territorial squabbles, their precious sovereign tenet of it, meant anything against the weight of the Confederation. They would surrender, or they would burn. It was that simple. He almost believed it. 36 light seconds away, on a planet the humans called Earth, a young woman named Dr. Eris Thorne was having the worst day of her life. It had started normally enough coffee. Commute the usual arguments with her graduate students about signal processing techniques, but by mid-afternoon, Normal had fled screaming into the night. I'm telling you. The pattern is impossible, said Marcus, her senior researcher, running his hands through hair that already looked like he'd been tugging on it for hours. It shouldn't exist. It can't exist. But it's there. Reese stared at the data streaming across her monitor. She'd been staring at it for 6 hours now, and it still made no sense. The Allen Telescope Array collection of radio dishes in Northern California, dedicated to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, had picked up a signal. That alone wasn't unusual. The array detected thousands of signals every day, most of them interference from satellites, aircraft, or terrestrial sources. But this signal was different. This signal was organized. It's too clean, Marcus continued, pacing the length of the control room. Look at the modulation. Look at the error correction. This isn't natural. This isn't even human. Our own deep space network doesn't transmit with this kind of efficiency. Eris pulled up the source coordinates. Where is it coming from? That's the thing. Marcus stopped pacing. It's not coming from anywhere. Or rather, it's coming from everywhere. The signal is diffused, like it's being broadcast from multiple points simultaneously. Spread across a volume of space roughly the size of... He trailed off. The size of what? The size of a small fleet? The words hung in the air between them. Eris felt her mouth go dry. A fleet of what? I don't know. Ships, maybe? Something big. Something moving this way at. Eris, They're decelerating. Whatever they are, they're slowing down. They'll be in high orbit in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Eris Thorne had spent her entire career listening for this moment. She had dreamed of it, prepared for it, written grand proposals about it. First contact, the holy grail of her field. And now that it was here, she felt not excitement, but terror deep. Primal terror that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with instinct. How many? She asked. At least 40. Maybe more. The resolution isn't good enough to be sure. 40 ships. Coming toward Earth, decelerating, not accelerating, which meant they weren't passing through. They were arriving. Have you told anyone? Marcus shook his head. You're the first. I didn't know what to say. Hey everyone, there's a fleet of alien spaceships heading our way. Have a nice day? Eris stood up abruptly. Get me the director. Then get me every politician, every general, every person with power who will listen. And Marcus? Yeah. Pray that whoever they are, they come in peace. Because if they don't, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. 3 weeks passed. They passed differently for different species. For the humans, it's for the humans. They passed in chaos. Governments fell into emergency sessions. Military forces mobilized. Religious leaders held vigils. Scientists argued about protocols, about possibilities, about whether to signal first or wait for contact. The world's usual divisions didn't disappear. Old hatreds never died. That isly, but they were temporarily overshadowed by a new, unifying fear for the Confederation fleet. The weeks passed in cold, methodical preparation. Battlemaster Traxon reviewed tactical scenarios. Admiral Vex preened her feathers and planned her speeches. The lesser species ran diagnostics, checked weapon systems, prepared for the moment when they would introduce themselves to the galaxy's newest client race, for the Archivist. Alone in his shadows on Axia Prime, the weeks passed in prayer. He prayed to gods whose names had been forgotten, for a species that no longer existed, for an outcome he knew was impossible. He prayed that this time would be different. He prayed that someone would listen. No one did. On the 21st day, the indomitable reason emerged from behind Earth's moon and announced itself. The transmission was simple. Broadcast on every frequency the humans used for communication, it had been prepared by Confederation linguists who had spent the 3-week approach studying human languages. And it was designed to be unmistakably clear. Citizens of Earth, you are addressed by the Galactic Confederation, representing 47 intelligent species and 1,200 inhabited worlds. Your planet has been classified as a Level 3 developmental world. Requiring oversight to ensure galactic stability, you will surrender all weapons of mass destruction. Dismantle your military forces and accept Confederation authority within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in the orbital bombardment of your major population centers. You have 72 hours. Acknowledge. On Earth, the transmission was received simultaneously by every government, every military, every media outlet. For a moment, the planet held its breath. Then the panic began. Battlemaster Traxon observed the human response with something approaching scientific interest. As predicted, chaos erupted across their information networks. Governments issued contradictory statements. Military forces mobilized without clear direction. Populations fled. Cities clogged highways, emptied stores. It was exactly the behavior he had anticipated from a primitive species facing an existential threat, but there were anomalies. Isolated incidents, he murmured, studying the data streams. Explain. His tactical officer clicked rapidly. Several human organizations are not following predicted patterns. Military units in 3 separate nations have activated nuclear launch protocols. Despite the futility of such weapons against our shields, a private corporation in the Northern Hemisphere has launched an unauthorized spacecraft, apparently a mining vessel, retrofitted with what appears to be a nuclear device. Traxon's mandibles twitched. They're sending a nuclear weapon against us. From a mining vessel? Apparently, the vessel's trajectory suggests they intend to detonate the device in close proximity to our fleet. The yield is insufficient to cause damage, but the symbolism is notable. Symbolism. The humans and their symbols. Traxon had studied their art, their literature, their religions. Everything they did was layered with meaning, with metaphor, with emotional significance that defied logical analysis. Even their warfare was symbolic flags and anthems and speeches. It's about honor and freedom and sacrifice. It was inefficient. It was irrational. And somehow it was all so compelling. Continue observation, he ordered. Catalog all deviations from predicted behavior. The deviations multiplied. A global network of human hackers calling themselves Prometheus. After some mythological figure began flooding Confederation communication channels with corrupted data, not viruses. Their primitive systems couldn't penetrate Confederation security. Instead, they sent memes, poetry, music, images of human art, human suffering, human joy. The data was harmless, but it was also overwhelming billions of individual transmissions, each one unique, each one carrying some fragment of human culture, on the indomitable reason. Cathar communication officers found themselves processing images of human faces, human emotions, human experiences they had no framework to understand. A mother holding her child. A soldier weeping over a fallen comrade. A painting of stars that somehow made them feel small. A song about loneliness that echoed in places they didn't know they had. This is illogical, one officer reported, its mandibles clicking in distress. They know this data cannot harm us. Why do they send it? Traxon had no answer. Admiral Vex, watching from her own vessel, felt something she couldn't name as she viewed the transmissions. The Avi were an artistic species. Their culture valued beauty, harmony, emotional resonance. But human art was different. It was raw. It was painful. It was beautiful in ways that hurt. The archivist said they would change us, she whispered to her aide. Is this what he meant? Before the aide could respond, a new alert flashed across her display. A single human ship, not the mining vessel, but something smaller, faster, had broken orbit and was approaching the fleet. It carried no weapons, no nuclear devices, nothing that could possibly threaten a Confederation vessel. But it was coming anyway. Hail them, Vex ordered. The image that appeared on her screen was a human female, perhaps 30% of their years old, with dark skin and eyes that burned with something Vex couldn't identify. She was alone in what appeared to be a cramped cockpit, surrounded by displays and controls that looked laughably primitive. This is Dr. Eris Thorne of the SETI Institute, she said, her voice steady despite everything. I'm here to talk. Vex stared at her. You're alone. In that vessel? It's a decommissioned space shuttle. I borrowed it. Vex's feathers ruffled in disbelief. You stole a spacecraft to approach a hostile alien fleet alone? Eris Thorne smiled, and it was not a reassuring smile. Stole is such an ugly word. I prefer requisitioned without prior authorization. And yes, I'm alone. Because someone needs to ask you a question before you do something we'll all regret. What question? The human leaned forward, her eyes never leaving the screen. Vex blinked. Why what? Why are you here? Why this ultimatum? We've spent 60 years listening for signals from space, hoping to find someone, anyone who might be out there. We dreamed of first contact. We imagined trade, diplomacy, exchange of ideas. We never imagined this. This is diplomacy, Vex said. But even as she spoke, the words felt hollow. The Confederation has protocols. Protocols, Eris interrupted. You have protocols for conquering primitive species. How many have you done this to? How many civilizations have you pacified because they might become a threat someday? Vex was silent. That's what I thought. Eris sat back in her seat. Look, I'm not here to fight you. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to tell you that you've made a mistake. Not about our technology, or our weapons, or our ability to resist. You've made a mistake about who we are. Explain. We're not unified. You've probably noticed that. We fight each other constantly over land, resources, ideas, sometimes just because we're bored. It's our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. Because when we're not fighting each other, we're competing. And when we compete, we innovate. She gestured at the primitive controls around her. This shuttle was designed in the 1970s. By human standards, it's ancient. But the computer I'm using to talk to you? That's from last year. The satellite network that let me find your fleet? That was launched last month. We don't move in straight lines, Admiral. We leap. We stumble. We fall, and then we leap again. Fex felt something cold settle in her chest. The archivist said almost those exact words. The archivist. An ancient being. He warned us about your species. We didn't believe him. Reese was quiet for a moment. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm beginning to think we made a mistake. On the surface of Earth, billions of humans watched the standoff unfold through whatever means they could access. News networks showed the image of the lone shuttle approaching the alien fleet. Social media exploded with speculation, fear, hope, prayer, and in 1,000 different places. 1,000 different humans made 1,000 different decisions. A billionaire in South Asia launched every satellite his company owned, positioning them to broadcast human culture into the alien fleet, every movie, every song, every book. Every piece of art his servers could access. A collective of musicians in Europe organized a global concert, broadcast on every frequency they could reach. Singing songs of peace and defiance, a retired general in North America activated an emergency network of military commanders, coordinating defenses that no one had authorized but everyone knew were necessary. And in a small room in California, a young hacker named Marcus watched the data, streams, and made a choice. He didn't know what frequency the aliens used for internal communication. But he knew what frequency the archivist had mentioned, a frequency that appeared in ancient texts. In mathematical constants, in the very structure of human DNA, it was nonsense. Probably coincidence. Wishful thinking. But he tried it anyway. He sent a single transmission on that frequency. Not a virus, not a threat, not even a message. Just a song. The oldest song he could find. A lullaby. A mother singing to her child. And somewhere in the darkness of the lunar surface, something heard it. On the bridge of the indomitable reason. Traxon was preparing to issue the final ultimatum when every sensor on his ship screamed simultaneously. Report. He clicked, his mandibles moving faster than they had in centuries. The tactical officer's voice was barely a whisper. Energy reading. Massive. Coming from the human moon? The moon? That's a natural satellite, no? The officer's compound eyes were fixed on the display. And for the first time in his existence, Traxon heard fear in a Cathar's voice. It's not natural. It's a ship. It's been there for millions of years, dormant, waiting. And now it's waking up. On the view screen, the lunar surface rippled. Dust fell away in sheets. Regolith that had accumulated for eons cracked and crumbled, revealing something beneath something vast, something ancient, something that should not exist, the thing that emerged. From the moon was larger than anything the Confederation had ever built. Its hull was polished obsidian, smooth as glass, etched with patterns that predated human civilization by millions of years. Energy conduits pulsed along its surface, awakening systems that had slept since before Earth had life, and as the Confederation fleet watched in frozen horror, it moved not fast, not aggressively. It simply rose from its million-year slumber and glided silently into position between Earth and the invaders. Its shadow fell across the Cathar vessels, across the Avi cruisers, across every ship that had come to pacify humanity. Then it broadcast a single message, not a threat, but a greeting. It spoke in 1,000 dead languages, languages that predated the Confederation itself. And then, in perfect modern English, we stand ready. On the bridge of her tiny shuttle, Eris Thorne stared at the impossible ship and felt tears streaming down her face. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know where it came from. But she knew with absolute certainty that it was human. Or rather, It was what humans had been, what they might become again, and somewhere on Axia Prime. The last archivist smiled through his tears and whispered words that no one heard. Battlemaster Traxon had commanded Cathar vessels through plasma storms, asteroid bombardments, and the gravitational wake of collapsing stars. He had never felt his flagship tremble. The indomitable Reason was a masterpiece of engineering, 12 kilometers of crystalline hull, reinforced by molecular bonding fields that could withstand direct hits from relativistic projectiles. It did not tremble. It could not tremble. And yet it trembled. Analysis, he clicked, his voice steady despite the chaos of alerts flooding his neural interface. Now, the tactical officer's mandibles moved, but no sound emerged. For 3 full seconds, an eternity in Cathar, processing terms, the officer simply stared at its displays, unable to reconcile input with reality. Battlemaster, it finally managed, the object. It's not responding to any known scanning frequencies. Our sensors indicate a mass approximately 1/3 that of the human moon. But the energy readings. Explain the energy readings. The officer's compound eyes flickered through spectrums Traxon had never seen them use. They're off scale. Every sensor we have is saturated. Whatever power source drives that vessel, it's generating more energy than our entire fleet combined. Possibly more than our entire species has generated in our recorded history. Traxon processed this information. His logical mind rejected it. His strategic protocols offered no response. For the first time in his existence, Battlemaster Traxon of the Cathar Collective had no plan. On the view screen, the ancient vessel continued its silent drift. It had positioned itself exactly between Earth and the Confederation fleet, not threatening, not aggressive, simply present. A shield, a warning, a promise. "The Avi Admiral is hailing us," reported communications. "Put her through." Admiral Vex's image flickered into existence. And Traxon was startled to see her feathers flattened against her skull in unmistakable fear. The proud Avi, whose species had dominated galactic politics for 40,000 years, looked like a hatchling facing its first storm. "Traxon," she said, and her voice shook. "Tell me you have something. Tell me you know what that is." "I have nothing. Our databases contain no record of any vessel matching this description. The technology predates our oldest archives by unknown margins." Vex's crest twitched. The archivist. He said his people erased themselves from history. He said they made sure no records remained. Are you suggesting this vessel belonged to the first? To his species. I'm suggesting that the archivist may have been wrong about who built it. The implication hung between them. If not the first, then who? What species could have constructed something so vast, so powerful, so impossibly ancient? And why had they hidden it in a moon orbiting a primitive world? Before either could speak further, a new alert flashed across both their displays. The ancient vessel was transmitting again. On board her stolen shuttle, Eris Thorne watched the transmission with a mixture of wonder and terror that defied description. The signal resolved into an image, not a hologram. Not a data stream, but something that felt almost organic, as if the ship itself was reaching out to touch her mind directly. The figure that appeared before her was humanoid, but not human. Taller, slimmer, eyes that held galaxies within them, and yet, somehow impossibly, it felt familiar. "Child of Earth," the figure spoke, and its voice resonated in places Eris didn't know she had. "We have waited long for your awakening. Who are you?" Eris whispered. "What are you?" "I am what you were. I am what you will become. I am the echo of a species that forgot itself, and the memory of a species that remembered." The figure gestured, and suddenly Eris saw not with her eyes, but with something deeper, the history of this vessel. She saw its construction millions of years ago, by humans who were not yet human. Beings who had evolved on Earth, who had achieved wonders beyond imagining, who had spread across the galaxy and built an empire that dwarfed anything the Confederation had. Ever dreamed she saw their fall, not conquest, not defeat, something worse. She saw them grow complacent, stagnant, certain of their superiority. She saw them forget what had made them great, the struggle, the hunger, the beautiful chaos of becoming. She saw them fade, not in fire, but in silence, leaving behind only echoes and artifacts and one final gift. This ship, this guardian, this promise. We knew you would come again, the figure continued. Not as our children, our distant descendants, stripped of memory and technology, forced to begin anew. We knew you would face the same tests we faced, the same predators, the same temptations. So we left this behind, not as a weapon, as a choice, the choice to become what we were, or to become something better. Eris felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't have said why. I don't understand. What do you want us to do? The figure smiled, and it was like watching dawn break over an ocean. Nothing, child. We want nothing from you. That is the point. The Confederation comes to demand your submission, your obedience, your surrender to their Jersu. We come to offer you the opposite. We offer you freedom. The freedom to choose your own path, make your own mistakes, become your own destiny. But the fleet they'll attack. They will try. The figure's smile didn't waver. Let them. On the bridge of the indomitable reason, Traxon made his decision. All vessels, he broadcast to the fleet, prepare for defensive formation. I want firing solutions on that artifact within Battlemaster. The tactical officer's voice cut through his command with unprecedented urgency. The artifact is launching craft. Traxon's mandibles snapped together. Show me. The view screen shifted to show thousands of objects emerging from the ancient vessel's maul craft. Each perhaps the size of a human fighter jet, but with configurations that made no tactical sense. They weren't armed. They carried no visible weapons, no missile ports, no energy cannons. They were they're spreading outward in a pattern that resembled nothing so much as a blooming flower. Are they attacking? Vex's voice demanded over the channel. I don't know. I can't. Traxon stopped. The craft were moving faster than anything their size should be capable of, accelerating toward the Confederation fleet with impossible grace. Defensive batteries online. Target locks, Battlemaster. Wait, the tactical officer's voice had changed. They're not targeting us. They're moving past us. It was true. The swarm of small craft ignored the Confederation vessels entirely, streaking past them toward nothing. They spread out across the system, forming a vast web that encompassed not just the fleet, but the entire inner solar system. Then they stopped, and the galaxy held its breath. On Earth, billions of humans watched the spectacle through telescopes, through news feeds, through the desperate recordings of amateurs who had pointed their cameras at the sky and refused to look away, in bunkers and boardrooms, in temples and taverns, in hospitals and homes. They watched the impossible dance of lights above their world. They watched the alien fleet paralyzed. They watched the ancient guardian, silent and vast. They watched the swarm of smaller craft, frozen in a pattern that seemed almost artistic, and they waited in a cramped apartment in Jakarta. A young mother held her child and whispered prayers in a language she barely remembered, in a field in Iowa. A farmer stood beside his tractor and stared at the sky. Too odd to move. In a laboratory in Switzerland. A team of physicists watched their instruments and wept at data they couldn't explain, in a command bunker in Colorado. A general who had spent his entire career preparing for nuclear war found himself hoping, for the first time, that he would never have to give the order. And in a million other places, a million other humans did a million other things, some brave, some foolish, some beautiful, some terrible, because that was what humans did. They responded. They adapted. They refused to simply wait for their fate, Battlemaster. Traxon watched the frozen swarm and felt something he had no name for. His tactical models were useless. His strategic protocols were meaningless. Every calculation, every prediction, every logical framework he had built over centuries of existence had just been rendered irrelevant by a species that was supposed to be primitive. Battlemaster, the tactical officer said quietly, The small craft aren't just positioned randomly. They're forming a network, a communication network. Communication with whom? With each other. With the main vessel. And the officer paused, as if unable to believe its own sensors. And with the planet below? They're interfacing with human communication systems, every network, every satellite, every device. They're creating a global consciousness. Traxon didn't understand. A what? A network. A mind. The humans are? They're all connected now. Not through technology, through these craft. Every human on that planet is sharing thoughts, feelings, experiences. For the first time in their history, they are truly unified. On the view screen, the ancient vessel pulsed with light, and in that moment, Traxon understood. The artifact wasn't a weapon. It was a mirror. It wasn't designed to destroy invaders. It was designed to reveal the invaders to themselves, to show them what they were really facing. Not a primitive species with primitive weapons, but a species with the capacity for something far more dangerous than war, the capacity for unity. Aboard her shuttle, Eris Thorne felt the connection blossom in her mind like a flower opening to the sun. Suddenly, she was not alone. She was linked to every human on Earth. Every joy, every fear, every hope, every despair. She felt mothers holding children, soldiers standing watch, artists creating, scientists discovering, lovers embracing, mourners weeping. She felt the full, overwhelming, impossible diversity of her species. And she felt how all of it, every contradiction, every conflict, every beautiful flaw somehow, is fit together into a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. She felt humanity, and humanity felt her through her. They saw the alien fleet. They saw the ancient guardian. They saw the choice that lay before them. And in that moment of perfect connection, they made their decision. Not through governments, not through leaders. Through something deeper, something that had always been there. Waiting for the right moment to emerge, they chose peace. The transmission that emerged from Earth was not a single voice, but a chorus. Every language, every dialect, every accent woven together into something that transcended words. It carried emotions, images, memories. It carried the full weight of human experience. From the first cave paintings to the latest space launch, from the joy of birth to the sorrow of death, from the heights of love to the depths of loss, it carried everything they were, and it carried a simple message: we will not fight you. We will not surrender to you. We will simply be what we are. And we invite you to be what you are, not conquerors, not judges, not masters. Just beings like us, trying to find their way in a vast and mysterious universe, on the bridge of the indomitable reason. Traxon processed the transmission and found that his logic circuits had nothing to offer. This was beyond calculation, beyond prediction, beyond any framework he possessed. For the first time in his existence, he felt truly lost. And then, impossibly, he felt something else. He felt the human transmission touch something in him, something he hadn't known existed. A place beneath logic, beneath strategy, beneath the cold certainty of Cathar consciousness. A place that responded not to data, but to what? He had no word for it. Beside him, the tactical officer made a sound that might have been a sob. "Battlemaster," it whispered. I don't understand. I'm feeling things. Emotions. That's not possible. Katha, don't feel emotions. Traxon looked at his officer, at this being he had served beside for centuries, and saw something he had never seen before. Tears. Actual tears. Glistening on compound eyes that had never known moisture. "We feel them now," he said quietly. "We all feel them now." The crystalline spires of the convocation chamber rose 17 kilometers into the thin atmosphere of Axia Prime, each facet catching the light of 3 suns and casting rainbows across the floating galleries where the most powerful beings in the known galaxy gathered. It was a place of impossible beauty, of whispered diplomacy and silent warfare, where species who had mastered faster than light travel before. Earth's first fish crawled onto land now sat in judgment of lesser races. High Admiral Vex of the Avi, nation preened his iridescent plumage, the feathers along his crest shifting from deep indigo to royal purple as he surveyed the chamber below. The Avi had dominated galactic politics for 40,000 years, not through brute strength, but through patience, strategy, and an unshakable belief in their own superiority. His people had charted the first trade routes between spiral arms. They had brokered the peace that ended the 1,000-year war between the mechanists and the organics. They had built this very chamber, and now they faced a problem. "The assessment is complete," droned the Cathar representative from his position. In the lower ring, his katana's body absolutely still save for the rhythmic clicking of his mandibles, the only indication of emotion his species ever displayed. Battlemaster Traxon had been sent personally by the Cathar Council to observe these proceedings, a sign of how seriously his people took the matter. The species designated human has achieved fission technology, rudimentary spaceflight, and artificial intelligence at a level we classified as developmental stage 3 over 2 million cycles ago. They are aggressive, tribal, and demonstrate no capacity for unified galactic cooperation. Vex tilted his head, watching the data streams flow across the central holographic display. Images of Earth flickered past, blue oceans, green continents, swirling clouds, cities at night, weapons testing, political rallies, wars. So many wars. They fight themselves, Vex observed, and several representatives in the upper galleries rustled with what passed for amusement among their kind. They've never even achieved global unification. How do they expect to contribute to the Confederation? They don't, Traxon replied flatly. That is precisely the concern. Their aggression has nowhere external to focus. Currently, they turn it inward. But given another 1,000 cycles, perhaps, lest they will develop the capacity to project that aggression outward. History suggests preemptive neutralization is the most logical course. The chamber fell silent. Even among beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the word neutralization carried weight. It meant fleets, meant orbitals burning. It meant a species reduced to whatever the Confederation deemed safe, perhaps a protected reservation on some barren world. Their technology stripped away, their potential forever capped. It had been done before. Only 3 times in the last 1,000,000 years. Each time, the Confederation had justified it as mercy. Better to contain a dangerous species than to exterminate them entirely. "I move for a vote," Vex announced, spreading his wings slightly, a theatrical gesture he knew would carry weight. "All in favor of dispatching a pacification fleet to Sol System. To bring humanity into Confederation oversight and restrict their development to Stage 4 maximum, signify." A cascade of lights rippled through the galleries. Green for yes. Amber for abstain. No reds, yet no opposition. Vex felt satisfaction bloom in his chest. The Avi would oversee this operation naturally. The humans would become another client species, another data point in the great archive of galactic civilization. The vote is wait. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere. It wasn't loud. It was barely a whisper. Yet it cut through the chamber's ambient hum, like a blade through silk. Every being present felt it resonate in their bones, their carapaces, their crystalline matrices. From the shadows at the chamber's lowest level, where petitioners and relics were left to gather dust, a figure stirred. Vex's feathers flattened against his skull. He had forgotten the archivist was even here. They all had. The being who shuffled toward the central dais was impossibly older than any living thing in this chamber. Older, perhaps, than the Confederation itself. His species had no name that anyone remembered. They were simply called the First, the Forerunners, the ones who had mapped the galaxy when it was young and wild. Now, only one remained. The last archivist. His form was vaguely humanoid, draped in robes that had once been fine but now hung in tatters. His skin, if it could be called, that was the color of ancient parchment, cracked and fragile, and his eyes held depths that made even Vex look away. Those eyes had witnessed the birth of stars. They had seen civilizations rise to godhood and crumble to ash. And now, they fixed on the holographic image of Earth, with an expression Vex couldn't read. Archivist, Vex managed, fighting to keep his voice steady. This is a closed session. You were not summoned. No, the ancient being agreed, his voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. I was not, but I have watched your debates for 300 of your years. High Admiral. I have listened to your logic, your assessments, your confidence. The word dripped with something that might have been sorrow. I find I cannot remain silent. Traxon clicked his mandibles in irritation. The archivist's perspective, while historically valuable, is not relevant to current strategic considerations. His species forfeited voting rights when their empire collapsed. My empire, the archivist interrupted, and for the first time something flickered in those ancient eyes. Collapsed because I gave the same advice I am about to give you, and they did not listen either. Silence. Vex felt a prickle of unease beneath his feathers. The archivist's history was taught to every AV hatchling a cautionary tale about hubris, about the dangers of expansion without wisdom. The first had ruled half the galaxy for longer than most current species had existed. And then, suddenly, they were gone. Not conquered, not assimilated. Simply erased from the galactic stage. Their worlds left dark, their technology silent. No one had ever explained why. Tellus Vex heard himself say, and immediately regretted it. But the words were out, and the archivist was already moving closer, his tattered robes whispering against the crystalline floor. The ancient being stopped before the holographic display, reaching out one trembling hand to touch the image of Earth. His fingers passed through light, but he didn't seem to notice. We called them the Ancients, he murmured. Though we were the first, and they were young, so impossibly young. Their star was barely formed when our empire was already old. There. First multicellular life emerged as we were charting our 1000th colony. By the time they crawled from their oceans, we had already forgotten what it meant to struggle, to strive, to fight for every inch of progress. Traxon stirred. You speak of humanity? The primitive species. I speak of the species that destroyed us. The words fell like stones into still water. Ripples of shock spread through the galleries. Beings who had not moved in centuries shifted in their seats. Lights flickered as processors rebooted. Vex's feathers stood on end. But that's impossible. Your empire fell 2 million cycles ago. Humanity's recorded history barely spans 10,000 years. The math is wrong, the archivist said simply. Your records are wrong. All your records are wrong, because we made sure of it. He turned to face the assembly, and for the first time, they saw not a broken relic, but something far more terrifying, a witness. When we first encountered them, they were exactly as you described, primitive, tribal, violent. They had just discovered how to shape metal, to build cities, to write down their thoughts so they wouldn't be forgotten. We laughed at them, called them savages, children playing with fire while the adults watched from a safe distance. His voice grew stronger, resonating with an ancient pain. We sent observers as you planned to, studied them, categorized them, predicted their development. Our finest minds calculated that they would achieve spaceflight in approximately 40,000 of their years. If they didn't destroy themselves first, we were generous, gave them 1,000 years before we would even consider them a potential concern. A bitter laugh escaped him, a sound like breaking glass. 1,000 years. They did it in 400. The chamber was utterly still now. Even Traxon's mandibles had stopped clicking. By the time we noticed, they had already colonized their entire system. Within another century, they had developed faster-than-light travel-knot, the elegant warp drives we used. But something brutal, something that quite literally tore holes in space-time and pushed through. They called it the Alcubierre drive. After some ancient theorist, and it was inefficient, dangerous, and it worked, the archivist's hands clenched into fists. We debated what to do. Some argued for preemptive action, as you do now. Others insisted they were still too primitive to matter. We held conferences, councils, endless debates, and while we talked, they grew. They spread. They adapted. He looked up at the assembly, and his eyes held a warning that transcended species, transcended time. You see, we made a fundamental error. We judged them by our standards. We assumed that because they were violent, they were stupid. Because they fought each other, they couldn't unite because they're tech.